Latest headlines in your Channel 4 News with Krishnan Guru Murthy.
The May Day nurses' strike hits half of English hospital trusts, but health workers are divided over whether to accept the government's offer tomorrow. Good evening. The May Day workers' protest had an NHS theme this year, with nurses on strike hitting intensive and cancer care in England. But unity on NHS pay has broken down, and some key unions are now in favour of accepting the government's offer. Tomorrow, they all meet to decide what to do. The nurses will reballot for another round of strikes, but with more money in their pay packets, will many of them say enough is enough?
And I'm in Paris. Last month, President Macron's pension reforms became law. But this is what victory looks like in the capital this evening.
Also tonight in Sudan, more airstrikes and gun battles as the humanitarian situation gets worse for ordinary people, with many Sudanese now also trying to leave. And the end of the run for the Printworks Super Club, as new figures show 12 hospitality venues in Britain closing every day for the last year. Well, thousands of nurses out on strike until midnight tonight, with the walkouts by members of the Royal College of Nursing affecting half of all hospital trusts in England. For the first time, staff working in departments like intensive care have joined the industrial action, with hospital bosses warning of long delays for treatment and disruption to services. Our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davis reports.
As trade unions marked May Day in traditional style, elsewhere in London, this year of industrial unrest registered another day of protest. Another strike by the Royal College of Nursing. Affecting only England and around half of its NHS trusts, it will last 28 hours. It would have been longer until a High Court ruling said its mandate expired at midnight tonight.
So we've seen significant disruption in services today. Trusts do everything they can to manage by planning very effectively. But it's not just about today, it's about the ongoing impact on patients, on staff, of having business as usual interrupted, of not being able to carry out those operations that are planned, people not being able to go for their appointments with consultants. That's going to have a significant impact over time.
This latest action by the RCN has entered a new phase. Previously, certain areas such as intensive care units and some cancer care, for example, had been exempt from strike action, but not this time. In Cheltenham, they closed A&E until Tuesday morning, diverting patients instead to the emergency department here in Gloucester. But agreements had been reached nationally, it was said, to ensure enough staff to protect life and limb services.
I think we're just desperate to be heard, and the only way we can do that is to go against what we are as nurses. And obviously we look after our patients and we care for them, we want them to be safe, but the way that we can best do that is actually to come out here and say something.
Save our NHS!
The government had offered a 5% pay rise for next year and a one-off payment for this year, but it was rejected by 54% of those RCN members who voted, hence this latest industrial action. How do you think this is going to end?
I don't know. I'm hoping it's going to be prolonged and people are going to accept this 5%, and I think we should come out striking more and more until we get what it is. It's about patient safety, it's not about greed. And save the NHS, because it's deteriorating rapidly.
Health unions are divided over the government's revised pay offer in England. It'll be discussed at a meeting tomorrow between them, ministers and NHS bosses, after which the pay deal could be implemented. The English Health Secretary called today's action premature. The RCN said the government needs to negotiate.
He needs to get round the table fairly quickly again and get this sorted out before we are pushed to reballot our members mid-May, and that could see us taking industrial action right up to Christmas.
Members of the Unite union have also rejected the government's NHS pay offer in England. They were marching as well today. Their union staging strikes in London and Yorkshire, with more elsewhere in England to follow tomorrow.
Well, I'm joined now by One Kassab, whose union Unite, along with the Royal College of Nursing, has rejected the government's NHS pay offer. And irony of ironies, on May Day, the workers are divided.
Yeah, there is.
I mean, it's a mess, isn't it?
Well, there is division amongst the unions, but that's up to each union to come to a decision. Our members have spoken and they've rejected the government's proposals, and we're clear about why that's happened. A one-off lump sum for 2022 doesn't do it. A below-inflation pay increase for 2023 does nothing to deal.
But it does do it for, you know, some key unions. So that makes tomorrow's meeting very difficult. What's your approach? Are you going to try and persuade those unions whose members have voted to accept the offer to now reject it?
We'll certainly be putting our case. Our members have rejected because it's a below-inflation pay increase. It does nothing to deal with 133,000 vacancies in England alone. It does nothing to deal with the safety issues in the NHS. So we will put those points over tomorrow. But I also want to be very clear, while we are going to put those points over tomorrow and hope to win the debate, if we do not, our members have made clear that they want us to carry on and to escalate and to take action. We're getting people joining Unite now, specifically because of our position.
I mean, the expectation is that if the majority accepts the offer and the government implements the offer and the pay packet, you know, the back pay gets paid and the pay rises go through, when it comes to reballoting for the RCN and eventually for you, it's going to be a lot harder to persuade your members. Do you think there's any merit in that?
This won't be the first time that an employer has imposed a pay proposal. It does happen surprisingly often. And over the last 15 months, we've been involved in over 600 disputes. We've won 80% of those, putting 300 million extra earnings into our members' pockets. So we know how to win disputes.
But what happens if the government just say, well, we're done? You've got your pay rise. You can keep striking, but all you're doing is adding to NHS waiting lists.
Well, our members have made clear they want us to escalate and they want us to take action, because this isn't just about the pound in our members' pocket. It's also about saving the NHS. And I think the question is, do these proposals do anything to save the NHS? One of the big problems is around recruitment and retention. And this is not going to bring in extra staff. Only 25% of shifts have the planned numbers of staff.
But you know what their strategy is going to be. They're going to say, well, if we just spin this out to the end of the year, inflation will be down. And, them asking for pay increases that are going to be double the rate of inflation by then, is their expectation, is going to look ridiculous.
Well, I think that would be wrong of the government to do that. I think they've dreadfully mishandled the situation as it is. Our view is that the Prime Minister now needs to intervene. This is a national crisis, not just around the strikes, but about what's taking place in the NHS. And the two are linked. And the Prime Minister really needs now to stop trying to teach us all about maths and get involved in this and help us resolve it.
Are you sure patients are still on your side? There have been reports from hospitals, anecdotal, that when patients are being called up and told your operation or your procedure is being postponed because of the strike action, they're getting some anger on the other side of the phone.
And that's understandable. And none of our members, no nurse, no paramedic, no security guard, because we represent people right across the NHS, none of those people want to take the strike action. But the fact is, we don't have any other option. And this is also about saving the NHS. Our members have asked me to make it very clear that one of the reasons why they are taking this action is about saving the NHS. We talk about the impact on strike days, but in reality, that is happening every single day. We are having excess deaths in the NHS, and that's appalling for the sixth richest country in the world for that to be happening.
So are you disappointed by the other unions? I mean, why do you think this has happened? Why have some people voted for it?
I can't talk about what other unions have done and why their members have voted for it. I can talk about why our members have rejected it, and they've made clear this does nothing about the future of the NHS. This does nothing to make the job better rewarded. For people who worked during the pandemic and in some cases made the ultimate sacrifice, that's what our members are telling us.
One Kassab, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, the May Day protests in France have been marked by unrest. Police clashed with anarchist protesters in Paris and a number of other cities as unrest broke out during rallies organised by trade unions against President Macron's unpopular pension reforms. Let's go to our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Porrick O'Brien, in Paris.
Last month, the Constitutional Court in France here signed off on President Macron's controversial pension reform law. So it's now law, and this was the first demonstration after it became law. It was a big test for both the unions and the activists. It looked like numbers were up on previous demonstrations, so something of a victory for activists and the unions on that front. Territorial intelligence services in France described a spirit of revenge in the air because of what was happening. So that did play out somewhat on the streets. There was sporadic violence. It started much earlier than before. Here's a sense of how the day panned out, and I should warn viewers there are some disturbing images in my report. International Workers' Day on the streets of Paris. Everyone had a job of work to do. Some served beer and refreshments to those demonstrating, for example. Another job, thousands out peacefully protesting against President Macron's pension reform. And the police had a job, figuring out again where the balance was between clamping down on violent disorder and allowing legitimate protest. Several police were injured, including this one, hit by a petrol bomb. Some people couldn't do their jobs and had to shut up shop because of the work of a relatively small group, the Black Bloc, anarchists whose task for the day, violence against property and the police. We're approaching Place de la Nation now, where the demonstration will culminate. This typically is where it gets violent as the evening goes on. The strategy, as far as the police are concerned, is to divide up the demonstration into various bits. So we have the Black Bloc, the anarchist militant groups who cause a lot of the violence. The police want to separate those from the rest of the... President Macron's pension reform is now law. From September, the first retirees will have to wait an additional 3 months for their state pensions. Then regular incremental rises by 2030 until it reaches 64. Today was a big test, particularly for the French unions. Is the momentum still with them on the streets against the reform, or has Macron succeeded in pushing it through without causing terminal damage to his tenure? The expression you hear again and again on the streets today is mépris, contempt. Demonstrators who believe Macron displays contempt for democracy, which he refutes, of course. The question, how much contempt is there out there for him now? How long will it last? And will it translate into something that poses an existential threat to his last term in office, as the Gilets jaunes protests did 5 years ago? Now, I should say hating your president is sort of par for course in modern France, but this does feel different. Macron is doing very, very badly in the polls. What was striking also about the demonstration today was the presence of the Gilets jaunes. That was the anti-fuel, the fuel protest movement 5 years ago. There was quite a few of them. Now, that's a new element to these demonstrations. We'll be here talking to some of those tomorrow night to give you more a sense of the composition of the demonstration here in Paris this evening.
Warwick O'Brien. Now, airstrikes and gun battles have continued between Sudan's rival military forces, despite another extension of the ceasefire. International aid groups are trying to get food and medical supplies into the country, while the UN's emergency relief coordinator warned that the humanitarian situation was reaching breaking point. Jonathan Rugman reports.
In Khartoum, the sight and sound of yet another broken ceasefire. This city of 6 million people reduced to a ghost town by fighting and looting, though some have no choice but to carry on eking out a living. This is Victoria selling tea by the roadside to feed her children. Even if we wanted to leave, we have nothing anyway, she says. At the capital's El Nada hospital, over 200 babies have been born since the conflict began just over a fortnight ago, though their mothers had to cross a war zone to get here, and medical staff have to take cover when they hear explosions outside.
My doctors in the hospital, our team, they take shelter about 2 to 3 times a day. We still see a lot of fire, we still see a lot of airstrikes, and It is frightening for the staff to see such things.
The UN reckons that 800,000 people could flee across Sudan's borders, as these new arrivals in Chad already have. Women here have given birth without any medical help, almost no shelter, and amid 45-degree heat. Zamzam Adam gave birth alone in her Sudanese village while it was coming under attack. Then she fled here in a hurry.
We fled because the Arabs came to the village and started burning the houses. We were very scared and had to leave quickly after I gave birth. I have no choice because I gave birth alone while everyone was fleeing, and then I did the same.
As for foreign nationals, well, they have flocked to Port Sudan, desperate to escape by air and by sea. Sudan is living through real terror, says this man. We could smell the dead bodies as we came from Khartoum. The first Red Cross delivery of medical supplies arrived from this warehouse in Jordan yesterday, but it can't reach where it's needed without a lasting ceasefire. If you're being honest with yourselves, at the moment you don't really have an idea how you're going to get the aid from the port to the hospitals.
Yes, getting it into the country was maybe 30% of the challenge, and the much bigger challenge is ahead of us. But at least the aid is there. And now we are calling on all those who are fighting on the ground for us to be able to deliver this aid to where it is needed.
In the meantime, millions in Khartoum remain trapped inside between two forces, accused of stealing the aid that there is and blaming each other for violating the latest truce.
Jonathan Rugman reporting. Now, at least 34 people, including 5 children, have been injured after Russia launched another wave of missile attacks across Ukraine. Local officials in the city of Pavlograd said dozens of apartment buildings and private homes were hit during the night, along with several schools and an industrial enterprise. 2 women are being treated in intensive care. Ukraine said 15 out of 18 Russian missiles had been shot down by its air defenses. The leader of the extremist Islamic State group has been killed during a raid in Syria, according to the Turkish authorities. President Erdogan said Abu Hussein al-Qurayshi had died after a security operation in Aleppo province, claiming the Turkish intelligence agency had been following him for months. Al-Qurayshi took over as IS leader after his predecessor was killed back in October. Now, the struggling American bank First Republic is being sold to JP Morgan after becoming the 3rd major US lender to collapse in 3 months. The San Francisco bank was seized by regulators this morning following concerns about its financial health. Kieran Moodley joins me now from Washington. So what happened?
Well, Krish, when those 2 other regional banks collapsed back in March, that was Silicon Valley and Signature, there was a concern about the status of other regional banks, such as First Republic. And so what happened was the biggest banks got together and they gave First Republic $30 billion to keep them afloat, to keep them in business. But what happened was that First Republic's clients, they got spooked by all that news and they withdrew $100 billion in deposits. That's about 80 billion pounds. That all led last week to First Republic, that led to their share price plummeting. We then saw the government seize control of the bank, and then we saw today the news about JP Morgan Chase taking over the bank. That seems to have calmed things down for now, and Joe Biden just came out and said that the banking system is safe, it's secure, and that he would do more to ensure it remained that way. Let's hear from him now.
I've called on Congress to give regulators the tools to hold bank executives accountable, and I've called on regulators to strengthen regulations and supervision of large and regional banks. And folks, we have to make sure that we're not back in this position again.
So this crisis over?
Well, maybe. I mean, Christian, this is still the 2nd biggest banking failure in US history. And there are 2 bigger concerns about the wider economic picture here in America. Firstly, the US economy did slow down in the first quarter. And so news like this, it could once again spook consumers. It could also lead to banks reining in their lending. Secondly, we have a potential looming debt crisis here in Washington. because the US government has reached its debt limit. And in order for that to be raised, Congress needs to agree to do so. And if it doesn't, the US government will default on its debt. And that has never happened in history before. The problem is the Republicans won't raise that debt limit unless the government agrees to cut spending, to slash spending. And of course, the Democrats won't go along with that. So what do we have? We have stalemate. And so while today the US markets are calm, and it does feel calm here in the capital, the concern is that there could be more economic turmoil in the weeks ahead as we approach that debt ceiling deadline.
Kieran Moodley in Washington. The Scottish-born host of MasterChef Australia, Jock Zonfrillo, has died suddenly at the age of 46. Police said his body was found at a house in Melbourne in the early hours of this morning, but they're not treating his death as suspicious. Celebrity chefs, including Jamie Oliver and Gordon Ramsay, paid tribute, while Zonfrillo's family said their hearts were shattered at the news. After the break, going out with a bang as hospitality and nightlife venues struggle to stay open amid the cost of living crisis and other pressures. We're at the final weekend for London dance club Printworks. Welcome back. Now, more than a dozen hospitality venues in Britain are closing down every day as businesses struggle to cope with the downturn in the economy and soaring energy bills. After surviving all the challenges of the pandemic, many are finding it an uphill struggle to stay open, while others are threatened by regeneration projects, like South London's popular Printworks nightclub. It's being turned into offices after the local council approved a new development. Simeon Brown has been there for its final weekend.
For the final time, lights on, mic check, at London's iconic Printworks.
Look, we're closing today, and who knows what the future will be. You know, people like us at Printworks, we employ 650 people per show. That whole ecosystem of security, stewards, bar staff, lighting designers, engineers, riggers, you know, they're all part of this ecosystem. And obviously, there's a knock-on effect for everyone.
This room once printed the Evening Standard, but when the press closed, nights like this are what made this part of southeast London famous. And that was before Batman beat his way through the crowd in a new franchise filmed here. The venue's success has come at its expense. Local rents, property prices and investment have risen, and Printworks is new neighbours. Today it is closing its doors as a new commercial development is built on site. Unlike Batman, Printworks is not set to return. This venue is not alone in facing an uncertain future. This is a challenging time for the entire sector. If venues are not facing existential threats from the cost of rising rents and new commercial developments, then they are from the sheer cost of keeping the lights on. According to new research, more than 12 hospitality venues a day closed their doors for good over the past year amid pressure from soaring costs. The total number is 4,593 licensed premises over the past year to March. That's a contraction of 4.3%. What impact has the increase in electricity and power had on your running costs across all of your venues?
Well, I mean, this venue alone costs thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds per show to run, so it has been tricky. But you know, we're a privately owned business. We've tightened our belts, and we're getting through it. But it is challenging. You have to make lots and lots of choices.
But choice is one thing that appears to be diminishing for revellers as venues close their doors.
These places are shutting down left, right and centre. This is probably one of the last ones as well. Like, it's been like 3 or 4 that have gone in the last year.
So I'm super sad. I've tried a few other venues. I don't think anything compares. And I think we should reclaim it because they're messing a lot of our spaces up.
I don't like it. Like, what are they going to do about it? Where are we going to party? Where are we going to listen to music? So.
These are dance music's true believers, congregating for a final service led by star choir leaders. Homegrown international DJ Tisha has bookings from Ibiza to Chicago and has noticed many peers moving abroad. What does the closure of Printworks and venues like this mean for your sector?
It's pretty devastating, actually, because there's not very many venues like this, of this size, with this kind of production and this kind of just level of everything left in London. I think it's still a great city for live music. I mean, there's so much cool stuff going on here still, but I think we're hanging on by a thread, you know.
But it is far from just London. Nationwide hospitality has had a crippling few years. Since the pandemic, there are near 14,000 less licensed venues, from restaurants to music venues.
12 businesses per day is a frightening statistic. We've lost just under 14,000 businesses lost for good, which come with, you know, people's livelihoods, their jobs.
The government has described the recent challenges as exceptional. Their energy discount scheme began this month for eligible companies, and globally prices have fallen. But that is not the only challenge in this sector, where every dance could be the last.
Tonight's main news. Nurses are staging a 24-hour strike across England, affecting half of the country's NHS trusts. For the first time, staff working in all departments, including intensive care, are taking action. NHS England has warned patients to expect disruption and delays to services throughout the strike period. Health service unions will meet tomorrow to decide whether to accept the government's current pay offer. And that's all we have time for this evening. We are back at 7 tomorrow night. Until then, from all of us here, that's Channel 4 News. Have a very good evening.